Welcome to Generations, a show which helps people 50 and better lead happy, healthy, and productive lives. Here's your moderator for today, Gloria VanDemmeltraadt.
Hello, and welcome to Generations. I am Gloria VanDemmeltraadt, happy to be here, and I want to introduce my co-hosts, Beverly Crosby.
It's nice to be here.
Great, good to have you. Nadia Giordana.
I'm happy to be here today, too.
Wonderful. And that brings us to our guest today, Bob Sitko, who is an expert in bees. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you for asking me here.
Bob, let's start by telling us a little bit about what you do, and then we can kind of follow through and ask you some other questions.
Okay, well,
Great.
I have several hives as a beekeeper for about 40 years, and I'm still learning about bees because the science is coming along with the gene splicing and all that understanding further than ever before, and it's a great hobby. It only takes you about once a week or once every 10 days to look at your hive and see how it's coming along, if the queen is doing her job and if there's no diseases and they have enough food and etc. So that's what we learn in school. I just completed 18 years of teaching backyard beekeeping at Century College, and that was really great. Met a lot of great people. My classes were full for the last 5 years. I couldn't take anymore. I help at the University of Minnesota. They have a class in March. There are 250 people in that class every year.
Interesting.
They have another 200 in the back log. So they have to have another class. People are really interested in bees and pollinators, butterflies, etc.
It does seem to be very high on the popularity list at this time. Can you tell us how you got involved in the first place and why?
It's kind of a strange story because I had hay fever. And I worked with a guy who was a beekeeper, and he said, well, there's an easy cure for that. Take a spoonful of honey every day, and that'll desensitize your body. And it took me a couple years to get over that, but he said it works because the pollens that are in the honey will desensitize your body.
So it would probably best be local honey, wouldn't it?
He said also, make sure it's local honey, raw honey.
Raw honey.
I'll define that in a minute, but it has to be within like 20 miles of your house, so you got the same pollens that are bothering you. And the difference between processed honey and raw honey is in processed honey, they take the honey and heat it, destroy the crystals, and then they pressure filter it 5,000 pounds to take out all the pollen. And the reason they do that is it lasts longer on the shelf, and it doesn't sugar up.
Okay, and so that's how you got involved, because you were allergic?
Yeah, right. So it took me about a couple years, but it worked. So I asked my doctor, you think that works? And he was kind of hem-hawing, and I asked him if I could outgrow hay fever. He says, no. And when I told him what I did, he said, well, it probably works for you. But the medical profession thinks it's folk medicine.
Oh, really?
So they don't
They don't.
They don't think of that, but you know, I remember in the 70s when, quote, health nuts were around, there was talk about raw honey and allergies, and so that knowledge has been around.
Right.
I've believed it all this time, so.
Now they're starting to use honey in medical practice for burns, for skin grafts.
Really?
You can buy medicated bandages that have honey in them that you put on, and it really helps with the scarring.
And that's bee honey, opposed to there's clover honey. But you're saying that it's the bee honey that they're using for these purposes?
Yeah, from different plants. Now there's one plant in Australia called Manuka, And that is recognized by the medical industry as a medicine.
Okay.
And the beekeepers there got together and financed the scientific research and got it registered and everything. So hospitals are starting to use it now.
That's very interesting.
And bee pollen itself has its own niche
Right.
where people are using, I think also for allergies, but for other
Nutritional purposes. Sure, sure.
How interesting. Can we expand a little bit on Beverly's question? I heard her mention clover. The different types of pollen that the bees collect makes a different tasting honey or a different useful for different purposes.
colors.
Can you tell about
Absolutely.
that?
Depending on the plant, the color changes or the flavor changes. If you get real dark honey from buckwheat,
Yes, I've had some of that.
it's
have
like
too.
molasses almost. I love it myself, so I get a bucket of it every year from another beekeeper. But that was very popular around the 1920s. Farmers and people raised it for a cash crop, buckwheat. It would grow any place on gravel pits.
Oh my.
But today's people, when I give them a taste of that as a sample, they don't like it because they're used to the clover honey. The basswood honey is real light, and so it's a different texture and
Interesting.
Yeah.
You talked
I
about-
remember tasting buckwheat honey, and
it does
it's,
taste
it's
different.
heavier.
It
It's
is
a
heavier,
stronger
darker
taste.
and darker, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's what I remember too. You
Now-
talked about the beekeepers. What is a, okay, that's official title. What is a beekeeper? What's his role? What does he do?
a beekeeper really examines and facilitates the growth of the hive and their collecting, and has to recognize, like I said, diseases and prevent that. And we have what we call the 4 Ps of things that are bothering bees. There's pathogens, which are diseases. There's parasites. We have a varroa mite that sucks the blood and gives the bees viruses that they can't overcome. Now, they appeared in this country, in the U.S. here, in 1987, and scientists have been trying to eradicate it ever since with different chemicals. But you're killing a bug on a bug.
Yeah.
And that's really tough that you don't kill the host at the same time.
Yeah, since they're so small.
Right. To a bee now, they would be like having a paper plate stuck on you relative to our size, you know.
Oh, interesting.
And they cut into the external skeleton and suck the fats and stuff out of the bee, and worse yet, give them one of the 20 viruses that they carry.
Oh my word! Is that one of the reasons that we were hearing that bees are dying now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I never heard of that.
Right. The other 2 are poor nutrition. We're losing a lot of, plants through parking lots and stuff.
Oh.
Now there's the other one is the pesticides. Really a big problem. We're working against large chemical companies that are very lucrative business in the pesticide game, and they don't want to give that up. But the pesticides we use here are banned in Europe because of the killing of the bees.
So they're ahead of us in this
They
fight
certainly are.
against the loss of the
Certainly
bees
are.
because we're losing bees. We were hearing about it for the last several years, and they're the primary pollinators. How serious is that, and how long might that take to turn that around?
We don't know how long it takes, but here's how serious it is. If all the bees and pollinators died tomorrow, you would be only having grains and fish, because the grains are wind pollinated, the corn, the oats, the wheat. So you'd have porridge for morning, noon, and night. You wouldn't have any fruits, you wouldn't have any vegetables, anything with seeds. Now, you realize that the bees and the plants have a relationship where one can't live without the other. The plants need the bees to move that sperm to the ovary within the flower so they can produce seeds and fruit and berries. The bees need the nutrition from the plant. Bees can live with 3 nutrition parts. The pollen is the protein they need. The nectar is the carbohydrates. And then they need water. If bees have those 3 things, they can survive.
Okay. And how do they use those elements to produce honey?
They bring the nectar in, and it's about 80% water. Now they have to dehydrate that down to 18% water, and they know when it's 18%. If they were to put it in the cell and then cap it over right away, it would ferment in there. But they dry it down by fanning air over it and getting the moisture down. Then they cap it over, and that's what they use for the winter feed.
So when we see a swarm of bees, sometimes you see a swarm of bees and they look like they're all moving and they're busy working at something. They probably are actually working at something.
Sure, sure.
They're fanning and taking the moisture
Right.
out.
And they circulate it right through the hive, just like if you had fans in there.
So I have a simple question, but there's probably a really broad answer. Okay, where do bees actually live? You know, we think of swarms or we see them in little corners of buildings or whatever, but where does, if you're a beekeeper, what does their home look like?
Well, it's a box and it has frames that are removable, so we can pull these frames up and look at what the bees are doing, look at the queen's laying pattern, look for diseases. And there's 10 frames in every box, and we keep stacking boxes up. And we have about 3 of them for their nest area. Then beyond that, we have what they call supers, and that's where the bees store the honey. Now, they store it down below also for themselves, but they store it up above it and we take that off, and it's surplus. Now, in Minnesota, we have to leave about 90 pounds of honey on the hive for the bees in the wintertime, because they form a ball inside, and it's about 2 inches thick, and they shiver, eat honey, and generate heat. Inside that ball, if you put a thermometer in there, it'll be 93 degrees no matter what the temperature is outside.
Really?
20 below or
Amazing.
yeah, it is. And that's how they survive the winter. And then as it warms up, of course, they break up and they start searching for water. And
Well, this is a good spot to clarify when you asked about where bees live. I think a lot of lay people, myself included, lump a lot of bees, if you will, wasps and hornets and different things into that same category as bees. And what we're talking about primarily is honeybees.
correct.
And then there are some tiny little bees that look like honeybees that I used to call garden bees. I don't know what they are, but I know they were good bees, as a gardener would say. And we were talking before the show, and you said there's no such thing as a bad bee. They're just different levels. So what about those wasps and hornets? Where do they fit in the good part of the overall bee culture?
Well, for instance, wasps, they'll grab your cabbage worms.
Oh,
They're carnivorous. They, instead of pollen, they get their protein from meat. And what they do is they bite the head off of other insects in the body, and they eat your chest muscles.
Go wasps!
interesting.
I never knew that.
Right. And they all have a purpose. It's just different. Now, sometimes people get in the way, or they get in the way of us, and we can't tolerate, so we have to remove them. And
Wasps are, expanding further on Beverly's questions about where bees live, if they're not in a hive that has been a box that's
Yeah,
been made
right.
by a
Man-made.
beekeeper, where do they live in the wild?
They live
I
in-
know what
Yeah.
wasp nests look like, but I don't really know what a beehive looks like.
Honeybees, yeah.
Yeah.
honeybees live in hollow trees.
Oh,
Yeah,
just like
any place
Smokey
they,
the Bear.
Yes,
or the little
yes.
Winnie the Pooh.
any place they can
right.
get shelter from the weather or predators, safety, and they'll go in a hollowed out tree and make their comb in there and live for years.
Oh, for
That
goodness
takes me
sake.
back to something that happened to me as a child, and that was in a tree, could have been a hollow tree, I don't remember. Grew up on the farm. My brother had some sort of stick or whatever, and he was chasing the bees or doing something with all the bees. I happened to come out. I must have been 3 or 4 years old, and all of a sudden, all the bees, whatever, they came after me and stung me, and my parents had to take me to the hospital, and I was very, very sick. It was really dangerous back then. So, you know, it's. I guess what we all have to remember is what? Do not disturb bees. What if we had what's the difference? You know, good bee, bad bee. I mean, obviously they produce lots of honey, which is wonderful. What do people need to know about protecting themselves against, say, a bee sting?
Well, the best way is to stay away. For hornets, you can usually see their paper mache nest, and they won't bother you if you don't go and poke at their nest and stuff.
You know, and I learned something about those paper nests that used to scare the daylights out of me. And the feeling was, we've got to get rid of this. We have to get rid of this. It's going to be there forever. That's not true. They all die over the winter. So if you can stay away from it long enough for the winter to set in, you don't have to deal with it in the spring. You even have something you can take to show and tell in school.
Right.
Because they'll be all dead and gone.
My kids have done that, and we cut the side out so you can see what's inside there. Now here's what the hornets happens. In the fall of the year, they make a lot of new queens. These queens go out and mate, come back in, and then the queens make the new queens make their winter under rock piles and logs by themselves, and then they start a new colony in spring.
Okay,
So they don't live through in clusters. Everybody else and the worker bees and everything, the queen dies every fall. So
Just that queen or the number of queens survive.
tell us about the making of a queen. You use the term that they make a queen. How do they do that?
all the eggs are the same for the first day. When they hatch out, the bees feed certain cells, bee larvae, royal jelly all their life. This is something that comes from the gland bee, and they feed that, and that bee turns out to be a queen bee. The other bees, they start feeding pollen and a mixture of nectar and stuff, and they don't, and they're workers.
They're worker
Or
bees.
they're drone bees or something, but that's the difference.
So they know when they need queens, or they do it
Exactly.
every year, however many they need, and they make their queens.
Right,
Yeah. And there is just one queen per hive?
right, to begin with in the summer. And if that queen should perish, they'll know it within 2 hours.
Really?
How do they do that? The queen, her purpose is to lay eggs and give off pheromones that say, I'm here and there's eggs here. And if they stop getting that, they're all addicted to the queen. They touch her and they pass this pheromone around. And they all know when she is not there. And if she dies suddenly, they'll take one of those new eggs and start feeding it.
And how long does that take?
For a queen, it's 16 days.
16 days.
So if it happened mid-season, the whole hive might not necessarily perish if they lose a queen, if they get busy
Exactly,
right away and
right.
make a new one.
Yeah, it's 16 days for a queen, it's 21 days for a worker, and it's 25 days for the male drone. See, they're more complex than the girls.
Yeah. How long does I'm not sure which bee it would be, probably not the worker or the drone, but how long what's the expectancy of a normal bee, regular bee?
That's a good question, because during the summer, the bees live only 6 weeks.
6 weeks. So they don't live all summer long.
No.
No.
They live 3 weeks in the hive and then 3 weeks foraging. And so it's a short
And then
period.
they just die and another one takes their place?
Right. The queen lays about 1,500 eggs a day.
Oh, my goodness.
So they're constantly being replaced. The old bees are flying out. They don't die in the hive. They drop in the grass and stuff out of the hive.
Oh, Bob, I'm allergic to bee sting, but I don't know that I've ever been stung by a real bee. I've been stung by wasps many times and go to the emergency room and all that sort of thing. What's the difference between being stung by a bee or a wasp? Or is there a difference?
There is a difference. Their venom is different. You can be allergic to wasps and not bees. And
That's what I wondered.
now there's 3 stages of stinging. What kind of symptoms do you get when you're stung?
I swell up hugely, and if I'm stung by a big wasp, then I start not
Okay.
being able to breathe.
Yeah. There's the systemic one. There's the anaphylactic shock. That's where your
Throat swells up.
throat swells up. Your blood vessels dilate, so the poison goes through your system. Your chest pounds like crazy.
Right.
Your heart, you got to get to either use an EpiPen
Yes.
or get to the emergency room or both. It can kill you.
Yeah.
You can
Yes.
faint away. So you have to realize that. Now, a lot of people that call me say they're allergic to bees, and when I ask them, they say, well, it gets red, it hurts, it swells up. That's not allergies.
That's just being
That's just
stung.
a normal bee sting.
That's a
and-
normal
and it-
reaction
right.
for
You
your
You get
body.
a little bit of a reaction.
Right,
Yeah, that's
right.
all
It hurts
I get.
like heck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it
Now,
But-
of course, getting stung by bees is the good news, bad news.
Why is that?
The bad news is it hurts like heck.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
The good news is beekeepers don't get arthritis, and they rarely get cancer.
Interesting.
That is fascinating.
Now,
Isn't it?
I'm not a doctor, but here's what they tell me how it works. The venom energizes your adrenal glands, and they give off cortisol, which you've heard of
Yes.
cortisone shots.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
For,
And that's a natural product. That's
right, your body will produce that if it's stimulated in the right
So
way.
beekeepers do get stung on a frequently get stung. Is it that they tolerate it? It doesn't hurt them as much. They get used to it, or is it just tricks of the trade?
It can go either way. You can be a beekeeper and all of a sudden it's affecting you more, the stings. Or you can be less as time goes on. It depends on your body.
So it
just
depends on your
thinking.
body. That was a question of mine because I was stung 3 times last summer. I had 3 trips to the emergency room, and I have to be more careful this year because my understanding is that the more often you're stung, the worse your body reacts to it. Is that?
It can be, yeah.
It can be,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Now, what did they do? Give you Benadryl?
Yeah, they give me a shot
Okay.
of something, and
Do you carry an EpiPen?
yes, I do.
Okay.
I have used it one time. Yeah.
Okay. That's good that you
Yeah.
know
And that
what
helped,
situations
yes.
you're in, because if you were alone and you had that and no recourse, why, it could
Right.
be very dangerous for
Absolutely,
Right.
So
absolutely.
it's the venom itself that is good for, not proven, but that might be good for arthritis because it produces cortisone. Is that right? I mean,
you. Makes your
couldn't we
body produce
Natural
cortisol.
producing.
couldn't we just eat a lot of honey?
Instead of going out and getting stung.
There is a guy who is now passed away, but for 60 years he treated people that had arthritis with bee stings.
Oh.
He would put bees on their jointed area. He'd find out where it was tender and red, and he invited them to the house, and they stayed with him. And for a period of 5 days, he would sting them every morning for several bees.
Oh my
And at the
goodness.
end, the redness would go away, the pain would go away. Now the bones would never go back to their original position, but
it didn't progress.
yeah,
It didn't
right.
progress from there.
And the arthritis went away.
Seems like you'd be able to
Oh,
harness
wow.
that venom somehow and
He
inject
ju-
it in a different
his
way.
name was Charles Mraz. He was from Vermont, and he tells this story about this lady who used 2 crutches to go out to the mailbox every day and pick up her mail. And then she went to Charles Mraz and got the treatments. And she was walking out to her mailbox without the crutches, and the neighbors came by. And she jumps up in the air and does some clicks.
Oh, my word.
They put the brakes on and wanted to know what happened.
Oh, how fascinating.
I love that story.
Right.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So-
Do we have a time for one more question or not?
Yes, we do. We
Okay,
have
real,
time for one
real
more.
quick. Okay, bumblebee, yellow jacket, queen bee, the worker bee. Is there the main one, the big yellow jacket, and what's the difference with all of them? They all have a different role, right? They all have a different job.
Correct, yeah. They all eat different things, just like animals eat different things. So.
And a yellow jacket is a wasp rather than
Yeah,
a bee?
right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. We could go on all afternoon, and this has been so interesting, Bob, but I'm afraid our time is running out. We've really enjoyed having you, and we thank our audience for joining us, our co-hosts, Beverly,
Oh, it's been fun.
Nadia, thank you for being with us. Oh, and Bob Sitko, thank you so much for sharing information about bees.
It was my pleasure.
Wonderful to have you. We'll see you next time.